You're listening to continuing coverage in the suitcase murder, the trial of Sarah Boone, from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Now, back to the courtroom.
It's number 14. And this composite exhibit is State's Exhibit, I believe, number 13. And this is picture number 14. Do you see the, you said they were circular type injuries?
Yes.
And you've seen a regular baseball bat or a kid's baseball bat?
Yes.
A wooden bat. And if you were to swing that bat and hit somebody's body or hit a suitcase and the blunt force, that would be a linear line across that person, would it not?
It could be depending on the position of the body, the position of the suitcase, and the position or how the object came in contact.
What is a linear injury mean?
So linear injury is if you think, linear, it's more like a line.
Okay. Now, if you took the barrel of the bat, the very end of the barrel of the bat, and you poked into the suitcase with the barrel of that bat, would those spots there in this exhibit, is that consistent?
That's compatible with that, yes.
Excuse me?
That's compatible.
And then here's a close-up. This is picture number 15. Again, a close-up. Same question. Would that be consistent with poking the suitcase, if he's in the suitcase at the time, thrusting the barrel of that bat, the crown of that bat, would potentially prevent those type injuries?
Yes, it's compatible with that.
Now, I want to draw your attention to the cardiovascular system. Do you have your report?
I do.
Okay. You describe the proximal third of the left anterior descending coronary artery having greater than a 75% narrowing of the lumen due to its centrically placed firm yellow-white fibrolipid atherosclerotic plaque?
Yes.
And is that pretty much verbatim with what you said in the report?
Yes.
And that terminology is synonymous with a single vessel, high-grade atherosclerotic coronary artery disease.
Yes.
And in that location, it's kind of a classic location for what people refer to as the widowmaker.
Yes.
Because of the location in that vessel that supplies most of the circulation to the left ventricle.
Yes.
If you had a spasm in that artery, that could nearly totally obstruct the lumen and cause a fatal heart attack, could it not?
It could. It could cause a dysrhythmia, yes.
I'm sorry?
A dysrhythmia or an abnormal beating of the heart.
But that could kill him.
It could.
The lumen is the inside space of the tubular structure?
Yes.
Of that, and so that was blocked, over 75%.
It was. But there was no evidence of myocardial scarring. So when the vessels become blocked, you prevent blood from getting to the muscle of the heart. So there was no evidence that there was any scarring. There was no evidence that there was anything that happened acutely. When that happens, we can see changes in the actual muscle of the heart. So there were no changes suggestive of that.
Well, let me ask you something. If he were to get out of the suitcase on his own and he would have passed out or fell asleep on the couch, and she would have woken up the next day about that time and came down, and he was dead on the couch, and you did this autopsy, would it be fair to say that in your ruling on cause of death, that single vessel coronary artery atherosclerosis would be your probable cause of death?
It could be, but any sort of injury overrides natural disease if the injury is significant, right? So you don't have to be a perfectly healthy person to have trauma and die. So it's very common that we see people that have injuries for whatever reason, but also have a lot of natural disease. But we look at it as the injuries override the natural disease because especially atherosclerotic disease, that's considered long-term, right? So that's been going on for years and years. People walk around with that all the time. So what's different is that we have trauma, and so that overrides natural disease. And sometimes natural disease can contribute, but again, it depends on the individual. It depends on the circumstances.
So absent the positional asphyxia or the environmental asphyxia, and he was dead, and you did the autopsy, it would be fair to say that you would determine this was a natural death from an isolated coronary heart disease, would you not?
It would depend on the circumstances. And I can't speculate on this case because I know what I know about it.
If you had nothing else, the widowmaker would have caused his death, or you would have to have assumed, having nothing else, that would have caused his death.
I most likely would have given him cardiovascular disease.
Now, this ethanol metabolism that we talked about earlier, and there's a question about you believing he was in the elimination phase, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is it fair to say that Jorge Torres, the decedent, was in the elimination phase since the blood ethanol was below the vitreous value?
Yes.
Given the vitreous value was a 213, is it justified in saying the decedent's blood ethanol level was at least a 0.213 prior to starting the elimination phase?
Yes.
And now you know that the normal elimination rate is, I believe, a 0.015% per hour?
Yes.
Is that standard?
It's an estimate.
And so we have a difference of a 0.138 to the 213. So roughly 5 hours of elimination. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
So in other words, you would agree there's a short interval where the vitreous and the blood are identical.
Yes.
And then the blood drops beneath the vitreous value as ethanol is metabolized in the blood.
Yes.
So is it fair to say, given the significant difference in the blood and the vitreous ethanol values, that the true vitreous and blood ethanol level had to be much higher than what is reported in your report at the time that he passed?
At the time that he passed?
Yes.
No, this is reflective of the time that he passed.
Say again?
This is reflective, the 0.139, that's reflective of the time that he passed. There's not metabolism after death of the alcohol.
All right, well, let me, what I'm saying is, he could have been, prior to that time of passing, his blood alcohol level would have been much higher.
It was at least at the same level as the
At
vitreous.
least the
Yes.
At least the 213.
Yes.
It could have been much higher.
It could have been, yes.
Judge, if I could approach the witness.
You may.
This is defense composite exhibit for identification. Jay?
Has the state seen it?
Yes.
We stipulate J into evidence.
Was pre-marked as defense J, will be received into evidence without objection as defense 1.
Judge, can I publish these?
You may.
Ma'am, there's 5 photographs. I'm just in front of the autopsy. The first one is number 5. What does this depict?
So that's the left hand. So you're looking at the outer surface of the hand, the knuckles, and 3 of the fingers.
That bruise there on his top of his left hand?
Yes.
All right, and the same for picture number 4.
So that's the same, just a little bit further away and without a scale.
And then here is picture number 3.
So now you're looking at the thumb and the index finger?
And then it shows some bruising on the hand.
Yes.
And here's picture number 2.
So what you're seeing here is, from the scene, our investigators put brown bags over the decedent's hands. And that's, we collect evidence at the time of the autopsy. So at the scene, brown bags are put on the hands to preserve any evidence. And so that's why you're seeing this, because this is a picture that we take. We cut the bag open and we take a picture to show exactly what the hands look like.
You agree there's the bruising here on
Yes,
the back
there.
of the hand, and also up around the knuckle area?
Yes.
And the fingers, and also on the section here?
Yes.
And then here's the last picture, number 5, which, again, is the left hand,
Yes.
showing the bruising on the top of the hand as well as the knuckle area.
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
Any redirect examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
You were asked several questions on cross-examination about the alcohol level in this case. And I believe there was a term, metabolic phase or elimination phase. Could you just explain for us what that is?
Sure. So in the toxicology testing, there's 2 different levels that I ordered for levels of alcohol. One is they look in the blood to see the level of alcohol. The other is in what's called vitreous fluid or eye fluid. And we look at both areas because that can give us an idea of whether somebody is metabolizing through the alcohol or whether it's still rising. It just gives us an idea sometimes of how close to death they were when the ingestion of alcohol happened. But basically, the level in the eye fluid trails behind what we see in the blood. There will be a small point in time, as we discussed earlier, that they will be almost the same. But you can just think of it as the blood alcohol goes up, and then a brief period of time later, the alcohol in the eye fluid will start to show. So again, it's just to give us an idea of whether somebody is metabolizing or whether they're still, the level is still rising, or if they're still, intaking alcohol.
So the result in this case was indicative that George Torres's level was coming down.
Yes.
And I think some of the math was a little bit difficult to follow on the fly. But with that rate of dissipation, would it be fair to say that he would have been in that suitcase for approximately 5 hours, because he couldn't be drinking whilst in the suitcase, that we're seeing this rate decrease between these 2 levels?
Well, you have to be careful how you interpret it, because the numbers that I have from toxicology testing, that's from one point in time, right? We're collecting those specimens at the time of the autopsy, so that's only one point in time. It's possible, but I can't say for certain. All I can tell you is that at some point in time, his blood alcohol was at least the higher level that we saw in the vitreous fluid. So if, the calculation of the 5 hours, that's an estimate, because again, everyone's a little bit different. But I think it's reasonable to say 5 hours. Yes, that's within reason to say that.
And obviously a pretty obvious point, but we don't continue to metabolize alcohol after death?
Correct.
You were asked about studies or tests being performed on the suitcase in this case.
Correct.
Would the presence of objects in that suitcase also affect the length of time a person may have survived in that suitcase?
I guess if there were a lot of other objects in there, that maybe could, occlude the mouth or nose, or maybe if that means if there's more stuff in the suitcase, there's less room for the person. So I guess.
Another variable that would also be present would be the opening of that zipper, would it not?
Yes.
So if the zipper was further open, potentially more oxygen could be coming into that area. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, there could be more oxygen coming in, but that's always the question is, would it be enough? Right? Because you can still have oxygen there, but it may not be enough. And again, for kind of the factors that I talked about before.
And there would be no way to know exactly how far that zipper was potentially forced open.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Judge.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Can the parties approach for a moment? Members of the jury, it's 11:01. We did get a bit of a later start this morning due to those security issues. Do any of y'all need to take a break at this point in time? Raise your hands if you do. All right, court seeing no hands. State, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, may we approach one more moment?
Yes. Members of the jury, I have a matter I've got to take up with counsel outside of your presence. I promise it won't take too long. We'll bring you back in as quickly as possible. Again, same instruction I've given you previously. Please don't conduct any independent or investigation or research regarding the persons, places, things, or charge involved, and do not have any conversations among yourselves or anyone else about those things. We'll bring you back in as promptly as possible. Thank you.
Excellent.
We stipulate two is like you. We stipulate two.
Okay.
Y'all may be seated. Thank you.
Second judge. Judge, James Owens here, and I'm here with Sarah Boone. The first exhibit is State's Exhibit F for identification. It is the title Stipulation Victim Identification, and it is signed by Mr. Cacciatore, Sarah Boone, and myself, October 2nd, 2024.
Okay. And the other stipulation?
The other is a stipulation of FDLE report, again signed by Dave Cacciatore Jr., Sarah Boone, and James Owens. It is it's listed as identification, for identification State's Exhibit N. It is a two-page FDLE laboratory report generated June 3rd of 2020.
All right, can you approach with both of those documents, please? Thank you. State, anything else to add over and above what Mr. Owens identified?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Boone, good morning. You were previously sworn earlier today. I hold in my hand two stipulations. The first stipulation, pre-marked as State's Exhibit F, reads Stipulation of Victim Identification. Reads as follows. The Assistant State Attorney, Dave Cacciatore Jr., the defendant, Sarah Boone, as well as his lawyer, we have a scrivener's error there, James Sullivan, okay. Sullivan Owens, stipulate that the identity of the deceased in this case is Jorge Torres. signed the 2nd day of October, 2024. Ma'am, have you had the opportunity to go over this stipulation with your attorney?
Yes.
Do you understand what this stipulation means?
Yes.
Are you freely and willingly entering into this stipulation?
I am.
Did anyone force you, threaten you, or coerce you to enter into this stipulation?
No.
All right, the court accepts this stipulation. How do we want to handle the little issue with regard to his lawyer as opposed to her lawyer?
I'm fine with the court making an edit to scratch out his and insert her, if that's acceptable with the defense.
Acceptable?
Yes.
Ma'am, is that acceptable to you as well?
It is.
All right, thank you. The court will make that handwritten interlineation, removing his and adding her. State, do you seek, we'll move this into evidence in front of the jury, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you, sir. Moving now to what was pre-marked as State's N. Ma'am, this is a stipulation of FDLE report. It reads, the Assistant State Attorney, Dave Cacciatore Jr., and Defendant Sarah Boone, as well as his lawyer, James Sullivan Owens, stipulate to the admissibility into evidence at trial of the FDLE lab report authored by Carolina Benito on June 3, 2020. It bears Mr. Cacciatore's signature, your signature, and the signature of your attorney, Mr. Owens. Have you had the opportunity to review this stipulation with your attorney?
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to review the 2-page FDLE report that will be attached to it?
Yes.
Do you understand what this stipulation means?
Yes.
Are you entering into this stipulation freely and voluntarily?
Yes.
Did anyone force you, threaten you, or coerce you to enter into this stipulation?
No.
All right, the court accepts this stipulation. Any issue with striking through his and adding her state?
No, Your Honor.
No, sir.
All right, the court will make that interlineation as well. Anything else we need to address, state? I will return these to you for the purposes of moving them into evidence with regard to these two stipulations.
Yes, Your Honor.
So nothing else?
Nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Defense, anything else? All right, thank you very much. Anything else we need to address before we bring back in our panel?
No, sir.
No, Your Honor.
All right, let's go ahead and stand and bring back in our panel. Thank you.
Jury entering.
State, do you recognize our jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, do you recognize our jury?
Yes.
All right, members of the jury, thank you. You can be seated. Members of the jury, Ken, if you could, just confirm that you complied with the court's instructions during that short break by raising your hands. Record reflect that all juror members have raised their hands. State, you may proceed with your evidence and testimony presentation.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to move what's been pre-marked for identification as states F and states N into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right, what was pre-marked as states F will be received without objection as state 14. What's been pre-marked as states N will be received into evidence without objection as state 15.
And Your Honor, we would request that they be published.
Thank you. Members of the jury, I'm going to read to you some stipulations along with an instruction. When the parties agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated facts that you must accept as true are as follows. Stipulation of victim identification. The Assistant State Attorney, Dave Cacciatore Jr., and defendant, Sarah Boone, as well as her lawyer, James Sullivan Owens, stipulate that the identity of the deceased in this case is Jorge Torres. Stipulation of FDLE report. The Assistant State Attorney, Dave Cacciatore Jr., and defendant, Sarah Boone, as well as her lawyer, James Sullivan Owens, stipulate to the admissibility into stipulate into evidence at trial of the FDLE lab report authored by Carolina Benito on June 3, 2020. With that, State, you can call your next witness.
Meredith McCaskill.
Raise your right hand at this time, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Ma'am, good morning. Could you please take a seat and state and spell your name for the record for us?
My name is Meredith McCaskill, and it's spelled MEredithMcCaskill.
Thank you. Mr. J, you may inquire.
Thank you. Where do you work, ma'am?
I am employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Orlando Regional Operations Center.
And is that also called FDLE?
Yes, it is.
And what do you do for FDLE?
I am a senior crime laboratory analyst in the biology DNA section.
And what is your educational background? And we'll get into training and experience as well, but what's your educational background that allows you to do that job?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences from Clemson University and a Master of Science in Biomedical Forensic Science from the Boston University School of Medicine.
And when did you first start working for FDLE?
I started at FDLE in April of 2011.
Did you have any prior work experience as a forensic examiner of blood or biological or DNA evidence?
No, I did not.
So for the last 13 years, your experience has been with the FDLE?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have any sort of in-house training and then continuing education that goes on as an employee at FDLE?
Yes, so when you become a crime laboratory analyst, you have to successfully complete a training program. This training program takes about 1.5 to 2 years. It covers all of our policies and procedures and manuals, reading textbooks and scientific articles, and performing a lot of in-house testing and training under the supervision of a qualified analyst. There's also written and oral examinations, and you have to successfully complete every part of that in order to work cases as a crime laboratory analyst. And then every year we have continuing education. So that's education that we need to do in order to stay current with new trends and technologies in the field.
Does the lab itself enjoy any accreditations, and what process, if so, does it go through to get them?
Yes, FDLE is accredited by an organization called ANAB. It's the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board. So we've been accredited for, I believe, over 30 years. It's a process where every 4 years they send people to come and inspect our lab, make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing according to our policies and procedures, and then we're also following national standards that have been set down. That's every 4 years. It's very in-depth, and then we have additional kind of like spot checks every year just to make sure that we are maintaining everything that we are supposed to be doing.
Have you ever given testimony in court about your opinion about serology analysis or DNA analysis?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 35 to 40 times.
Have you ever not been allowed to give opinion testimony in those areas?
No, I have not.
Can you tell us about the place, particularly within FDLE? Tell us about your workspace and what personal protection equipment you may wear when you're doing DNA analysis.
Yes, so in my workspace, I have what I call a clean side, which is where I keep all of my paperwork. And then I have my other side, which is used for actual screening of evidence items. So this is a surface where I can clean it with a detergent. I clean all of the instruments that I'm using, so scissors, markers to take notes, anything like that is cleaned with a detergent both before I start and after I finish. And it's cleaned and maintained in between every item of evidence. So only one item of evidence is open at a time, and this is to minimize any potential contamination, so DNA from one item getting into DNA from a second item. I also wear what is called personal protective equipment. This includes a lab coat, face mask, gloves, and potentially a hairnet, depending on what type of evidence that I'm working with. And then the gloves are disposable, so they are changed before and after each item of evidence. It's also changed if I have to touch my computer to take notes, I change my gloves. If I have to touch another surface, I change my gloves. So it's a lot of procedures that we use in order to prevent my DNA from getting onto the item of evidence.
When DNA analysis is done, are instruments used to assist you in that process?
Yes, we have an instrument platform that we use that allows us to run the DNA in batches in a efficient manner. So there's multiple instruments that are used across the varying processes.
And do these instruments generate paperwork that humans such as yourself can then go read and interpret?
Yes, it does.
Now, in this particular case, you are not the analyst who examined the items. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you review the information that is generated by the instruments used by the analyst who did this work in coming to your own conclusions?
I was the technical reviewer on this file, so I reviewed all of the documentation and the paperwork and also the original analyst report.
All right. Now, one of the items that is said to have been analyzed was a DNA card. Are you familiar with what that is?
Yes, I am.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
Usually it's referred to as a DNA card or a bloodstain card, and that's just a card where somebody can spot blood, usually human blood, on it and dry it down. Then the analyst can take a cutting of that stained area in order to generate a DNA profile.
And is that typically the manner in which a decedent or a dead person's DNA sample is provided to the lab for analysis?
Yes, that's a very common thing that we see in decedents.
And can you explain to the jury how it is an analyst such as yourself would take that blood stain on a portion of the DNA card and develop a DNA profile?
Yes, so it usually is blood stained on the card, so you can identify that stain visually, take a cutting of that stained area, and then place that cutting into a sterile tube, which is then sent through the DNA process. So that's adding chemicals and heat in order to break the cells open and release the DNA into the solution, and then running it through the rest of the procedures where we determine about how much DNA is in the sample, make millions of copies of our specific areas of interest, and then generate a DNA profile that can be used for comparison to any questioned items in the case.
Do you use some sort of commercial kit to develop DNA profiles on known items such as this?
Yes, we do.
Approximately how many locations back in 2020 would have been tested on this DNA card?
In 2020, it was 21 locations.
All right. And in going through this process, is there a process that amplifies the amount of DNA?
Yes, there is.
Can you describe that?
Yes, so we need to amplify or make millions of copies of the specific areas of interest that we're looking for. We don't want to make copies of the entire DNA molecule. We're just wanting to isolate those specific 21 areas and make copies of those specific areas in order to generate the DNA profile that we use in forensic DNA analysis.
And do you know what a short tandem repeat is?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
Short tandem repeat, we also call them STRs. That's just what we're looking for in the forensic DNA analysis. There are short areas of repeating DNA pieces. So, for example, at somebody's DNA profile at a specific location, you can have a set of 16 repeats and a set of 17 repeats. And that's just this one little piece of DNA, and it repeats 16 times. And then you have a piece that repeats 17 times. And it's the number of repeats that is different from person to person.
And you said you might be a 16 at one spot and 17. Let's just be clear on what we're talking about. On one particular location, well, all of them, do you get DNA from mom and dad? Can you explain that?
Yes, so you get DNA from your parents. So it's inherited. You get half of your DNA from your mom and half from your dad. So when I'm talking about the short tandem repeats and the example of a 16 and a 17, that could mean that you got a set of 16 repeats from one parent and a set of 17 repeats from the other parent. So it's just the copies that you get from your parents.
And you might happen to have 16 from each.
Yes, that's also a possibility.
All right, and so the chemicals end up copying about, you said 21 areas in 2020?
Yes, so there's 21, and then we look at several areas that are on the gender marker, so it was 3 areas on the gender markers.
And each of these locations will come up with some sort of number like 16, 17, 4, 4, so on and so forth.
Yes, that's correct.
Were you in reviewing the instrumentation data in this case, was the DNA profile that was said to have come from Mr. Torres, was there able to be a full DNA profile at those 21 locations developed?
Yes, a complete profile was obtained for that sample.
Now, can you tell us what a buccal or a buccal swab, sometimes people call it each, which way is the right way?
I usually use the word buccal, but buccal is not incorrect either.
All right, and what is that?
It's just a swab that we can use as a reference sample from a person. So it looks, all of our swabs just kind of look like a long Q-tip with only one end. And then you just take that cotton tip end and rub it on the interior of your mouth to get a good DNA sample. You have a lot of cells on the inside of your mouth and a lot of saliva. So that's a good source to use for a known sample from a person.
And these long Q-tips, I believe, as you described, are they put into a box that is designed in a way so that the Q-tip doesn't touch the edges of the box?
Yes, I've seen it in boxes like that, but I have also seen it where they've been put back into the original paper packet container. So either method is fine.
And did the FDLE in this particular case, in the data that you reviewed, was there buccal swabs represented as being from the defendant, Sarah Boone?
Yes, there was.
And in the process that you've briefly described for the jury already, can you just tell us if it's different in any way to take a part of that cotton swab to develop a DNA profile than a piece of the DNA paper?
No, it's the same process. With the buccal swabs, I'm just taking a small cutting of the cotton area of the swab, placing it in a tube, and then running it through the exact same DNA process.
And was a full profile at the 21 locations able to be developed for the buccal swabs represented as being from Ms. Boone?
Yes, a complete profile was obtained for that sample.
Were there also what we call unknown samples that were examined in this case?
Yes, there were.
And can you describe the difference between a known and an unknown sample for the jury?
Yes, a known sample is a sample from a specific person. So that's like the example of a buccal swab. I know that sample came from that individual, and I can use that as a way to determine that particular person's DNA profile. An unknown sample is just a sample where we don't know whose DNA or if there is any DNA on that sample at all. So those are question items that can be, once a DNA profile is obtained from that item, can be compared to the known profiles obtained from individuals.
And in this case, was there an unknown item labeled as DNA swabs representative coming from Mr. Torres's fingernails?
I believe it was fingernail clippings from Mr. Torres, yes.
All right, and typically, I know you didn't do the work on this particular case, but in reviewing the notes and in your experience, do these DNA samples from fingernail clippings come in as swabs, like a buccal swab?
So sometimes they can come in as swabs, but other times they come in as just fingernail clippings, so taking the clippers and just cutting off the ends of the fingernails. And then I've also seen it where they've been scraped using pointed sticks.
And so if there is a swab that came in represented as being from the fingernails, then that would go through the process of as you previously described for the buccal swabs?
Yes, that's correct.
And if it comes in as fingernails or scrapings, do you all have to make your own swabs?
Yes, that's correct.
And how would you go about doing that?
We have prepackaged swabs in our lab. We can then use some sterile deionized water and drip that onto the end of the cotton tip to make it a little bit moist so that it can pick up any DNA that is left on the item. And then we just swab the surface of the item, allow the swab to dry, and then cut it and place it into a tube for the DNA process. So we're just making our own swabs at that point.
And was there a profile obtained from what was represented as being a DNA sample from Mr. Torres' fingernail clippings?
Yes, there was.
And did it match either of the two known profiles that we've just discussed here this morning?
Yes, it did.
Which one?
Mr. Torres.
Were there any results indicating foreign DNA on this item?
No, there were no DNA results foreign to Mr. Torres obtained from either set of fingernail clippings.
Likewise, was there something examined in this case represented to be swabs or DNA samples from Ms. Boone, the defendant's fingernails?
Yes, those were swabs that were sent represented as being from her fingernails.
And so just like the buccal swabs, they come in as a Q-tip and then you would test that in a similar manner?
Yes, that's correct.
Was a profile able to be developed from what was represented as being swabs from Ms. Boone's fingernails?
Yes, there was.
And did that profile match either of the two known profiles that we've been discussing this morning?
Yes, it did.
And whose was that?
Miss Boone's.
Now, in regards to both of these last items that we've talked about, the fingernail swabs from each Mr. Torres and Miss Boone, is it expected that their profile would be developed from DNA swabs from their fingernails?
Yes, it is. All of those samples were represented as being from those particular individuals, so their DNA is expected to be on those items.
Was there any DNA foreign to Miss Boone on those samples that were representative as coming from her fingernails?
No, there were no DNA results foreign to Miss Boone obtained from either set of fingernail swabs.
Now, with this amplification process that you've described, is it PCR?
Yes, it is.
How sensitive is it when a sample is taken from an unknown area, such as fingernails?
The PCR process is pretty sensitive, and over the years, as the science has evolved and testing has changed, the process has become even more sensitive over the years.
And hypothetically, if two people are living together and are intimate partners, quite frankly, would you expect the intimate partner's DNA to show up on swabbings from their fingernails?
Yes, it's possible that their DNA would show up if they're in close contact with each other.
But in this particular case, after reviewing all of the instrumentation data, there was no DNA foreign to either of their fingernail clippers, both clippings or swabs from their fingernails, both Mr. Torres and Ms. Boone.
Yes, that's correct.
No other questions?
Any cross-examination?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Once you develop a profile, are you able to take that profile and compare it to other possible DNA on objects or items?
Well, if it's a DNA profile that is obtained from a questioned item, we can compare that to profiles from known individuals.
And in this case, an example of that, if an object from an unknown source, you could take that and compare it to a known profile. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you get a match with that comparison, what can you take from that?
Just that is the DNA profiles are the same.
So if it's an object, let's say like a bat, and there's a DNA profile that's obtained from the bat, and it matches a known profile, could you make the conclusion that that person touched or handled that bat from the known profile?
No, I can't. There's nothing in the testing that we do at FDLE that will allow me to determine how any DNA ended up on an object or how long it's been on that object.
Now, you said that in this case, what was sent for DNA comparison?
In this case, there was a bloodstain card or a DNA card represented as being from Mr. Torres, buccal swabs represented as being from Miss Boone, fingernail clippings from both hands represented as being from Mr. Torres, and then fingernail swabs from both hands represented as being from Miss Boone.
Those are the only items that were sent to your lab for comparison.
Those were the only items sent to the DNA lab, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I have no further questions.
Any redirect examination?
No redirect, she can be excused as far as the state is concerned.
Defense?
Yes.
All right, ma'am, you're excused. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
State, you may call your next witness.
Janelle Wadden?
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
Ma'am, good morning. If you could take a seat, state your name and spell it for the record, please.
First name is Janella, Junella. Last name is Wadden, UAD as in Delta, AN.
May it please the court?
You may proceed, sir.
Where do you work, ma'am?
I'm currently employed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office here in Orlando, Florida.
And what does Sheriff Mina currently having you do?
I'm currently, my current position is a digital forensic examiner.
And how long have you held that position?
I just hit 6 years.
And can you tell us about, and we're going to break it down, education, training, and experience. Let's just talk about your education. What's your educational background prior to becoming a law enforcement officer? In particular, what is relevant to being a digital forensic examiner?
I actually started in crime scene investigations with the Sheriff's Office. So I have a bachelor's in forensic science through the University of Central Florida. Upon transferring over to our digital forensics unit, I became a certified computer forensic examiner through the International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists.
That's IACIS?
IASIS, yes.
Can we call it ISIS?
Yes.
How do you say it?
IASIS.
IASIS. All right. I just want to shorten it for today.
Yes.
All right, so IASIS. Tell us about that program that you went through with IASIS to become a digital forensics examiner.
Yes, the beginning portion of it is in classroom training. It's normally only hosted in 2 different locations around the world, one being here in Orlando, the other one normally being somewhere over in Europe. They actually just expanded a 3rd location over in Australia. So again, the first 2 weeks are in classroom training, normally with over 300 other students. And then the next 5 to 6 months are all a peer review type training where they give you problem sets on how to, it goes from basic education on computer forensics to how to recover data. Could be pictures, could be videos. You're not sure until you pass one step to move on to the next one to figure out what you're, essentially what kind of questions you're going to get.
All right. We'll take a break from the education training experience for 1 second. On February 23rd, 2020, were you called out to a scene?
Yes.
Does that happen from time to time as a digital forensic examiner as opposed to your previous duties like a CSI, which would always go to the scene?
Yes, as a digital forensic examiner, we are required to come out on scenes if requested.
May I approach the witness with E for identification?
You may.
Showing you E for identification, you recognize states E for identification?
Yes.
And how is it that you recognize that?
I recognize the front label or the portion filled out on the envelope with my handwriting, as well as evidence tape sealed, also initialed with my initials.
And the information on it includes like your case number and some of the other information that you just answered?
Yes, case number, date of collection, and the item description.
And what is said to be contained inside of that envelope?
An Apple iPhone Model XS with a pink case.
All right, and if I am not incorrect, I believe there's 2 sets of evidence tape on that item?
Yes.
Can you tell us about each set?
The first set, which is the red tape here, initially when I collect or sometimes when we receive items from crime scene investigators, the packaging necessarily doesn't have to be sealed just because the phone might have to be kept charged on prior to us receiving the phone. So in this case, I did collect the item from the residence. I brought it back to our office. And then once I was done with my exam, it later gets sealed, again, with my initials and dates. And if there's a, later on an evidence review or somebody needs to review the item again, if we need to do an additional examination, the package might be reopened and then resealed again, hence the blue tape here at the bottom.
All right, other than the blue tape, is that item and the packaging substantially in the same condition when you were done examining what is said to be contained inside?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
If you would, could you open up this package and, without showing it to the jury at this point, see if you recognize what's inside of the envelope?
Yes, there's a phone with a pink case inside.
Do you recognize that as the item that you collected from the scene that you went to on February 23rd, 2020, and then later examined?
Yes.
All right. So, this scene, February 23rd, 2020, where is this scene?
I believe it's 4740, or can I refer to my report for the address or to the numerical?
If it would refresh your memory.
Yes.
Go ahead, and then when you're done refreshing your memory, let us know if your memory was refreshed.
Yes.
Your memory refreshed.
Yes.
What is your answer?
4748 Franz, not sure if I'm saying that correct, court, apartment number 3.
Now, I know you work for the Sheriff's Office in Orange County, but I still need to ask, is this in Orange County, Florida?
Yes.
All right. Now, you collected that item. May I move E for identification and evidence at this time?
Any objections?
No objection?
What was pre-marked as E will be received into evidence without objection. Estate 16.
Did you do anything with that item while you were on scene?
Yes.
What is it that you did with that item while you were on scene?
I was requested to come out. I was informed from the detectives that the user of the device gave consent for us to download her phone. So I responded out, and once I located the phone, I immediately started to extract the data from the phone.
All right, so now let's talk about what tools you used to do that. I assume there's some software involved with this process.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your familiarity and the training that you had in regards to using that software back in the time of February 2020?
Yes. One of the main tools that we use for data extraction is called Cellbrite. I did obtain, again, transitioning to our digital forensics unit, I obtained 2 certificates with Cellbrite, which is an operator certificate knowing how to operate the hardware and the extraction software, as well as a certificate in their physical analyzer software, which is more used for the analysis part. So once we download the phone, we get a digital file, which to us is a lot of data, which humans, we can't read. So their software basically makes it more readable for us humans, which we can then generate a report in different formats for review. So in this case, we used Cellbrite. They actually started to develop software for cell phone companies. So if you remember back in the day when you went to go upgrade your phone and you had to go into a brick and mortar store, they actually had the software to help transfer your old data from your old phone and transfer it to your new phone, like your contacts, your pictures, your videos, a lot of the data that you didn't want to lose when upgrading your phone. But they are now a predominantly digital forensics company, and they provide the software that we use to extract data off of digital devices.
And is there any hardware involved to use this software?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes, in this case, and especially at that time, we had 2 options. There was a portable tablet. In this case, you can still use a computer, and they have sister software that mirrors the exact same software that's on the portable tablet. So in this case, I had my call-out laptop with the extraction software installed on it, and just like you would to connect your phone to, let's say, your computer to export photos or take photos off of your phone if you want to save them, we're doing essentially the exact same thing in the field where we're connecting it to our computer, and we're letting the software pull all that data or the contents off of that phone.
When you were told that you had Ms. Boone's password to her phone device, do you do anything to try and make sure that the data cannot be manipulated or destroyed from the outside world?
Yes, it's standard protocol. Like once we receive a phone, hopefully somebody did it before it's handed to us. But again, if we're responding out to the scene or we're the only ones that are interacting with the phone, we for sure try to, if we are given a passcode, we try to confirm the passcode. And then the phone is immediately put into airplane mode, which will disconnect it from any outside network. And we also try to ensure, because not always, once you place your phone into airplane mode, it doesn't always turn off your Bluetooth and or Wi-Fi connections. So we may go in and make sure that those settings are also disabled before we extract the data.
All right, take us through this extraction process. I understand that there are many different levels of information that you can get depending on a lot of things that you'll tell us about. Can you tell us the level of extraction you were able to do on site with this cellular phone device?
Yes, for this specific phone, we were trying to minimally get the user data, again, the stuff that you guys can see when you're looking through your phone, your calls, your messages, your pictures, your videos. And in this case, that's the level of support that the on-scene software that we're able to use is able to download from the phone, especially with having a password or passcode.
All right, so I think we're all familiar with Windows. I think Mac has its own special iOS operating system as well. Can you tell us about the operating system that was on this particular cellular phone device?
Yes, Apple has its own operating system, iOS if you have an iPhone, and of course, even if you have Android or Apple, you're constantly getting notifications saying it's time to update your phone to the newest software. So in this case, it's an iPhone, so it's running their shortened version of iOS.
Can you also extract data that has been quote unquote deleted from the operating system? And can you just tell us all about that?
Yes, it is sometimes a possibility. It's not always guaranteed, but we sometimes have more advanced tools that can potentially pull that data from the device, and then later, once we get that download, we can put it into that software, and normally will give us indications on whether or not data has been deleted.
And so if a particular photograph or a Word document or some sort of file has been deleted from the operating system, may it still remain on the phone device or computer device?
Yes.
It may still be locatable with your software tools.
That is the hope. Again, not always guaranteed, but again, that's why we're trained to go in there and look for that the data behind the scenes to see if we can recover those artifacts. Yes.
Did you later do another extraction of this phone device back in the office?
Yes.
And tell us if it is different in any way, how your software or hardware was different in doing it at the office.
Yes, in this case, we use, again, a more advanced tool, which is able to capture, the technical term is a full file system. So we're capturing that whole filing cabinet, you would say, of the data stored on the phone, with, again, the probability to not only collect possibly deleted data, but also your systems information, application data, like your social media, messaging apps, everything aside from your normal user data, like your calls and messages and pictures and videos.
And what level of capture, and if you answered it in that, I'm sorry, what level of capture were you able to do?
Again, in this case, I was able to do the full file system back at the office. On scene, the technical term is an advanced logical or logical extraction, again, which encompasses your generic user data on your phone.
And the level of extraction you did at the office, does that encompass data that is outside of the operating system or in unallocated space?
It can include that data, yes.
Okay. Now, what kind of information can be generated by this computer software tool that you used to make it presentable for a human such as yourself or the members of the jury to review?
Yeah, in the software, it will place the data in data categories. So it's organized. We can, if we just want to search between messages, we can go in the messages category. If we want to look at logs, like maybe data that your phone's recording, like locations, app activity, that's also presented in its own data category. And it also has the ability to put all that data in chronological order in what they refer to as a timeline. So we can also see all that ongoing data in the timeline section. And if we need to, we can either narrow down to a small scope of time, or if it's requested, we can give all the data all in that timeline to whoever wants to review it.
And for instance, if there's an entry on the timeline that says, April 1st, 2016, photograph ABC was taken. Are there separate folders that are generated by this software tool that has all the images, such as that still photograph, generated?
Yes, when we export it or generate like in a PDF version of that report, all that data is categorized in a PDF, but it also exports a copy of that same data, such as images and videos, in separate subfolders. So if I just wanted to go look at the pictures from the phone directly, I could just go into that subfolder and just look at all thousands of images that might be exported from the phone.
And is there identifying information such as an IMEI that is generated by this software tool? And can you tell us what these things are?
Yes, the IMEI is One identifier that your cell phone has to help authenticate it to your cell phone network, it also is like a serial number unique to your phone. And in this case, our software is able to read and report all those device identifiers from your phone, including an IMEI.
And do you take actual photographs of the cellular phone device, like the exhibit we just put into evidence, to document it before or after you do the extraction?
Yes, just like in crime scene, a cell phone digital evidence is essentially another form of evidence. So we always try to document the current state, condition, whether it's locked, unlocked, and if we, again, in this case, we were provided a passcode, so I normally like to photographically document the phone's identifiers or accounts that may be logged into the phone.
Prior to trial, were you asked to look at two different exhibits to see if they represented a portion of that timeline you described that can be put into the PDF report form, as well as some of the images and videos from this extraction that you performed on the device that's in evidence?
Yes.
May I approach?
You may.
What I'm showing you first is O for identification. Did you have an opportunity to review that this morning to make sure that the portion of the PDF and the images in a separate folder there were part of the extraction that you did on this device that we're talking about?
Yes.
And was that accurate?
Yes.
P for identification, is that another carve out of the PDF timeline as well as videos and photographs from that device?
Yes.
All right, this time the state will move O for identification into evidence and reserve on P.
With regard to states O.
No objection.
All right, what was pre-marked as states O will be received into evidence without objection as state 17.
Permission to publish?
You may.
Opening up the file labeled extraction.
More continuing coverage in the suitcase murder. The Trial of Sarah Boone is on the way. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Press subscribe now.